Well, my next guest is famous for his many things, his urbane charm, his intellect, his caustic sense of humor. He's also a great debater, columnist, colorful commentator, political conventions. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. William F. Buckley. We're in the middle of a subject that it's sort of hard to change. Would you like to join in here in any way? What you've been...
You always looked like you just got up.
Join in about what?
Well, we're talking about the... talking about the Jewish Defense League, the justifications for violence, violence used against violence, violence to prevent violence. Any thoughts you have on the subject would be welcome and interesting and well expressed, I'm sure.
Well, I don't believe in civil disobedience. On the other hand, I sympathize with Rabbi Kahane to the extent of what I understand to be the emotional texture of his analysis, namely that a lot of people who spend no time at all deploring the systematic inhumanity of the Soviet Union find episodic violence by those who oppose the Soviet Union to be insufferable. I think as a matter of civil law, he is wrong. I think if he is caught at it, he should be arrested and stuck in jail. But at the same time, I think that as far as history is concerned, he may very well be making the salient point, which is the people that we nowadays drinking champagne with are engaged in what Henry Campbell of the New York Times called once a few months ago the worst assault on the human spirit in the history of mankind. So in that sense, I'm in sympathy with him.
Meaning
Russia.
Oh, Russian,
yeah.
But how about, there's a premise there that's kind of faulty. How about people who spend a great deal of time and effort not only deploring but fighting the Russian attempts and Soviet attempts at genocide and cultural genocide?
People
is
like
no longer...
you and me.
I hope so.
And
who also deplore acts of violence in this country.
I think you're quite right. I absolve us.
William F. Buckley has a knack of making you his ally.
I think on this point, this is a very, very vital point. I think in our day and age, when we're so busily building bridges to Moscow and everywhere else east, the whole concept of being anti-communist has become a very bad thing. Well, I put it to you, I have 4 children that I would like to see raised as good, observant, practicing Jews. If they were ever to fall under the kind of a regime that now rules Moscow, they could not be the kinds of Jews that I would like them to be. And I put it to you, therefore, that this is at least as great a danger to the survival of the Jewish people as an Adolf Hitler was. And it's about time that we Jews began to realize that a détente at the expense of the spirit of people, not just Jews, Catholics, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Protestants, is not a détente, it's Munich.
From Jews?
Pardon?
You mean capitalists as distinguished from Jews?
Catholics.
Oh, Catholics.
Yes.
They are not synonymous.
There are some Catholics that are not capitalists.
and vice versa.
The fact of the matter is that anti-communism is not a bad thing. And I think that a great many liberals who are attempting to create peace may be just forging a Munich which brings us neither peace nor honor.
I'm suspicious of simplistic comparisons. So, Hitler is not Torquemada, and Torquemada is not Stalin, and while all of them hated Jews, they hated them in different fashions, and even if you go to the great Talmudic scholars, they will tell you that in one instance they only wanted souls, in the other instance they weren't interested in souls, only in bodies, to kill and burn every last one of them, and others are interested in soil, as some Arab leaders. I mean, you cannot make these simplistic comparisons. There are no naked overseers with whips in their hands in the Soviet Union. What there is mental anguish, and cultural genocide is also murder.
Yes.
Also murder, and I grant you that.
Good.
But it has to be fought with those kind of weapons.
I'm suspicious that we're not going to get around to talking what I was invited here to discuss.
What were you invited to discuss?
What was
Do
that?
you remember? Obviously not.
No, I know you wrote a column on dog droppings recently. Please bear me out on this.
Oh, yes, but I
You did, didn't you? I would make
gave
up
that
a cheap thing.
I gave that bipartisan treatment.
Oh, that's true.
You
You're not here
can't
to-
give anything bipartisan treatment.
You're not here to tell us. I can't say where you stand on dog driving. Where you? That was not. No, I did understand that you had something you wanted to talk about, and it ties in.
I'm in favor of turning the problem over to the Security Council of the United Nations.
All right. You did write such a column. Well, yes. When we come back, we will recall what it was you wanted to discuss. We'll be back after this. Mr. Buckley, I have remembered. I think you wanted to talk something about the arms limitation talk and nuclear deal. And I wonder, how would you phrase it? Are you one of the folks who feels that the president is cozying up to the Russians too much, specifically in this case?
No, I think that would be an unfortunate way to put it. I think that that we are being asked to endorse pretty enthusiastically a set of arrangements which fly in the face of military and strategic prudence, and which, in fact, don't conform to the criteria of safety laid down by Mr. Nixon and his representatives over the last 2 or 3 years. I think it's unfortunate that you can see working in America today, or at least I think I see it, a sort of a hyper-anxiety for peace, which seems to be done without reference to the warnings which have historically been very important for us. And so I think that an awful lot of the arguments on the basis of which this particular treaty is being defended are arguments that tend to break down under analytical pressure. That's going to be a while before it comes to a vote. But sometime before that happens, people ought to think through to what the consequences of it are. Just for example, this morning, the papers carry a front-page report. The Secretary of Defense says, unless Congress votes to modernize our weapons, it would be better if we'd never signed that treaty in the first instance. Now, does he mean, therefore, if Congress doesn't vote to modernize our weapons, therefore we shouldn't ratify the treaty? This would be the logical result of a rigorous application of thought to what he said. But one fears that in the political ooze of the next few months, that will be lost. Now, if he says, I ask you to consider, is there a logical way out of that conclusion? If he says, unless Congress votes to take advantage of whatever it is that we can take advantage of under the terms of the treaty, better we hadn't signed it at all. Suppose Congress says, well, we're not going to, but we're going to go ahead and ratify the treaty. Do we then have a situation in which the President of the United States urges us to ratify a treaty which his own Joint Chiefs of Staff and Secretary of the Defense did not, under the circumstances, recommend? This is one of the things we have to think our way through.
Why would that surprise you? That kind of inconsistency happens all the time in politics.
Well, because it's your life and mine. I don't mind inconsistencies between you and him, or you and me, because the results aren't necessarily apocalyptic. But I live in this country. Nixon's just the president, that's all.
No, but the loophole
We're not going to have discriminatory bombs that distinguish between those who backed sound policies and those who didn't back sound policies. So I think in an age in which everybody can seize, everybody can blow each other up, one has to be sort of super careful. My assumption is that, especially where the Russians are concerned, you don't take chances.
But if you say we have enough to blow each other up, then you're still for more of the bombs that you're afraid of. Is that it?
Well, we can. This is very interesting. The Soviet has a thing called civil defense. It's practically an unknown word. You have to look it up in the dictionary these days. On the basis of which certain specialists in Soviet situation tell you that if in fact we had an all-out nuclear war today, 60% of our population would be wiped out and only 6% of theirs. They lost more than 6% in the Second World War. We see Laird telling us as recently as early this year that there was one thing that he worried about terribly, and that is that by the mid-70s we would have lost our Minutemen retaliatory capacity. This, he said, pleading for more than 4 safeguard ABM sites. Now we're going to give them up all except 2, and one of them simply to protect Washington, D.C., which I don't believe for a minute the Soviet Union would bomb, their greatest strategic ally. But in any event, in any event, you have the reading of your own specialists all of a sudden sharply contradicted over a period of time. Then Henry Kissinger, my friend Henry Kissinger, I'm very fond of him, 8 times in 3 briefings in Moscow, he said, now understand, the principal defense of this treaty is not the Soviet Union, to be sure. It's going to have much more than we have when we sign it. But look how much more they would have 5 years from now if we didn't sign it. At least we're going to get a, quote, freeze. To which I think it is appropriate to ask, why would the Soviet Union have outstripped us? I mean, don't we have people who can build more submarines and build more Minutemen silos and so on and so forth? Where has President Nixon been for the last 3.5 years? Why, in the last few months of Mr. Nixon's term, do we have to get told by his principal representative, we have no alternative because we had nothing a building? Why didn't he tell us 3 years ago that we would have no alternative? Is he telling us now, as a result of our stupid delinquency of the past 3.5 years, we're in a jam? If so, what is the appropriate political answer to that kind of analysis? It seems to me that we are being railroaded into a treaty without A, an analysis of what Nixon's own people have said about it, and without B, an examination of why we got ourselves into that jam. Do you know why?
If I had the answer, I would blurt it out as quickly as I could.
I don't see the point seems to be that if we're going to have a war, we're going to be in trouble. But if we're going to have peace, this treaty is better than anything that we've had up until now. I'm one of your wishy-washy liberals, I guess, who cannot think in terms of mega deaths. I find that obscene. I find it obscene to think in terms of 6% of the Russians dying or 60% of America dying. I cannot think in those terms, and it's not that I don't want to consider it, because I'm also a realist into the bargain, and that's a curse I have to bear. But I don't believe that we have an obscene preoccupation with peace. You didn't say obscene. You said something frantic or something.
Mr. McCall, I don't volunteer to stand in your way if you want to execute a suicide pact. That's your business. But when you're talking about 60 million Americans, I might be one of them, my children might be one of them, the people in this room might be one of them, and I think they ought to ask themselves very solid questions. Are there circumstances under which the Soviet Union might prepare to go ahead and tolerate 6 million deaths? If by doing that they could get 60 million American dead and have their way in the world. Now, let me, if I may, tell you that the way these things tend to work out, or so I would think it is, that people take the measure of each other, even as they would before a barroom brawl, and the guy who's bigger suddenly emerges in all of the calculations of the guy who's smaller. And then there isn't a fight, it's avoided, but on terms dictated by the big guy. And this is what I fear more than a nuclear war, because I don't think a nuclear war is likely to happen. But what may very well happen is a situation in which the Soviet Union recognizes that we recognize that they recognize that they are in a position to knock out our Minutemen silos, to neutralize all but, say, 15 of our submarines, sufficiently to neutralize our bombs, so that American president is then left with this. Okay, America's intact. All they got was the people who were protecting the silos. Now, does America therefore take what's left and dump it on the Soviet Union, getting 50 or 60 million or 6 million dead, and as a result, invite a retaliation that means the end, substantially the end of human life in America? What American president going to do that?
You find this sufficient reason not to vote for the man?
Well, not vote for whom?
Not to vote for the president, the current president?
Oh, my God, McGovern will make it 100 times worse. As Melvin Laird said, our arsenal would consist primarily of white flags. if he were elected. No, but I do think that the whole purpose, and liberals say that the chief executive has exercised much too much power. You're quite right, I think. And under the circumstances, I think that Congress should very definitely deliberate the implications of this treaty before simply proceeding as though it were a step towards universal peace, when in fact it fails to fulfill some of the major qualifications as enunciated by its incumbent defendants.
Excuse me, folks, we have a message. We'll be right back.